Morning. It's good to be with God's people in God's house, amen? And I'm not Ant, so you don't have to do three amens. So I just take one. All right. This morning, just a couple of things. One, if you're a guest with us this morning, we're extraordinarily grateful that you're here with us. We don't take that lightly. We are glad that you're a part of our worship service, and then we get to study God's Word together. We get to sing the praises of our King together. And if you would, there are these blue cards floating around that are in the back or in the welcome center that are just welcome cards that if you would fill those out, it just helps us to know to reach out to you, that we can pray with you, see if there's anything we can help, any questions we can answer. So if you would fill those out. If you would like to give, there's boxes by the doors, as well as you can do that online. And all of these things you can do by scanning that QR code in front of you. It takes you to our website. I want to just make a big announcement. So we've been talking about the pastoral residency and our ambition to be a planting church for 2 years now. By God's grace, we have sent out our first church plant, but this is something that is far from just being a one-time incident for us if we can do anything about it. And so tonight, we have what is an incredible moment for me that it is becoming real. Our first pastoral resident who's going to come on staff with us as a pastoral resident for 3 years. He is coming tonight, Matthew Wacker, and we are going to be hosting a meet and greet for him at 5 o'clock. Now, this is just going to be very light refreshment, so don't plan on getting dinner here. But for an hour, show up, meet, talk to him, ask questions, hear a little bit of what he's going to be doing when he comes on, as well as ask him questions, just things that you're curious about, hear about his story. I'd really encourage you make it a priority. We're just going to be here for about an hour just to meet him, but I want there to be an overwhelming amount of love shown to him, showing up, and actually showing our gratitude that we're getting to bring him on for this. And then he will be preaching next Sunday, and we will be voting on actually establishing and starting this pastoral residency as a church. And so be here next Sunday to hear him preach and get to celebrate this. It's the culmination of a lot of work on the part of our leadership team and our staff to make this happen. This morning, we are going to be in Genesis, starting in chapter 20, or 32. So if you would, go to Genesis 32. To set the context, this is Jacob kind of nearing the end of his story in Genesis. And we've read up until this point, Jacob stealing the birthright from his brother Esau, destroying the relationships in his home, leaving and going to a foreign land where he suffered there. A lot of the due recourse for his actions and what he was choosing to do, he then had done to him. And he was there in another foreign land for 20 years, outside of the promised land, outside of where God's blessings were going to be passed generationally, outside of all these things that he had grew up in. He leaves. He never sees his mother again. She's passed away before he comes back. And so now Jacob has heard from God to return to the promised land. God's kept his promises to bless him and to prosper him. And he started back towards the promised land, and as he gets close, behind him is Laban, who he has a tattered and torn relationship with. Neither trust each other, so they pretty much write up a contract for how they're not going to go against one another from this point on. And in front of him, you have Esau. And Jacob doesn't know what's waiting for him with Esau. And so we read, as he comes to this moment, this defining moment between the past that he's just left, and in front of him is the future of addressing the past that he left behind 20 years ago. And Jacob went on his way, and God's angels met him. And when he saw them, Jacob said, "This is God's camp." So he called that place Mahanaim. Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the territory of Edom. He commanded them, "You are to say to my lord Esau, this is what your servant Jacob says. I've been staying with Laban and have been delayed until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male and female slaves. I've sent this message to inform my lord in order to seek your favor." And when the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, We went to your brother Esau. He's coming to meet you, and he has 400 men with him." Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people with him into 2 camps, along with the flocks, herds, and camels. And he thought, if Esau comes to one camp and attacks it, the remaining one can escape. And then Jacob said, "God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, 'Go back to your land and to your family, and I will cause you to prosper.' I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. Indeed, I crossed over the Jordan with my staff and now have become 2 camps. Please rescue me from my brother Esau, for I am afraid of him. Otherwise, he may come and attack me, the mothers and their children. You have said, 'I will cause you to prosper. I will make your offspring like the sand of the sea, too numerous to be counted.'" He spent the night there and took part of what he had brought with him as a gift for his brother Esau: 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 cows for milk with their young, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, and 10 male donkeys. He entrusted them to his slaves as separate herds and said to them, "Go on ahead of me and leave some distance between the herds." And he told the first one, "When my brother Esau meets you and you ask, 'Who do you belong to? Where are you going? And whose animals are these ahead of you?' Then tell him, 'They belong to your servant Jacob. They are sent as a gift to my lord Esau. And look, he is behind us.'" He also told the second one, the third, and everyone who was walking behind the animals, "Say the same thing to Esau when you find him. You also are to say, 'Look, your servant Jacob is right behind us, for he thought, I want to appease Esau with the gift that is going ahead of me. After that, I can face him, and perhaps he will forgive me.'" So the gift was sent on ahead of him while he remained in camp that night. And during the night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 slave women, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream along with all his possessions. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. And when the man saw that he could not defeat him, he struck Jacob's hip socket as they wrestled and dislocated his hip. And then he said to Jacob, "Let me go, for it's daybreak." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." "What is your name?" the man asked. "Jacob," he replied. "Your name will no longer be Jacob," he said. "It will be Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed." And then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he answered, "Why do you ask my name?" And he blessed him there. Jacob then named the place Peniel, "For I have seen God face to face," he said, "yet my life has been spared." The sun shone on him as he passed by Peniel, limping because of his hip. That is why still today the Israelites don't eat the thigh muscle that is at the hip socket, because he struck Jacob's hip socket at the thigh muscle. Now Jacob looked up and saw Esau coming towards him with 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 slave women. He put the slaves and their children first, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. He himself went on ahead and bowed to the ground 7 times until he approached his brother. But Esau ran to meet him, hugged him, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. And then they wept. When Esau looked up and saw the women and children, he said, "Who are these with you?" And he answered, "The children God has graciously given your servant." Then the slaves and their children approached him and bowed down. Leah and her children also approached and bowed down. And then Joseph and Rachel approached and bowed down. So Esau said, "What do you mean by this whole procession I met?" "To find favor with you, my lord," he answered. "I have enough, my brother," Esau replied. "Keep what you have." But Jacob said, "No, please, if I have found favor with you, take this gift from me. For indeed I have seen your face, and it is like seeing God's face, since you have accepted me. Please take my present that was brought to you, because God has been gracious to me, and I have everything I need." So Jacob urged him until he accepted. And then Esau said, "Let's move on, and I'll go ahead of you." Jacob replied, "My Lord knows that the children are weak, and I have nursing flocks and herds. If they are driven hard for one day, the whole herd will die. Let my Lord go ahead of his servant. I will continue on slowly at a pace suited to the livestock and the children until I come to my lord at Seir." Esau said, "Let me leave some of my people with you." But he replied, "Why do that? Please indulge me, my lord." That day, Esau started on his way back to Seir, but Jacob went to Succoth. He built a house for himself and shelters for his livestock, and that is why the place was called Succoth. After Jacob came from Padan Aram, he arrived safely at Shechem in the land of Canaan and camped in front of the city. He purchased a section of the field where he had pitched his tent from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of silver. And he set up an altar there and called it God, the God of Israel. This passage that we've just read is a passage that shows the moment that Jacob finally comes to honor God as his God. 20 years of wrestling with God and men. 20 years of Jacob trying to accomplish things his own way, to have his plans fail, and to see that God brought about his blessing despite what Jacob was doing. 20 years. Now we could say, who can be a hard-headed person for 20 years, but some of you need to refrain from elbowing the person beside you. We all know what it's like to be hard-headed and stubborn, set in our ways. And when it comes to growing in our humility, I will say this: the wisest and godliest pastor I ever knew told me, "Dylan, never ask for humility. Never pray to God, 'God, would you give me humility?' Because then God is going to humble you, and it's going to be extraordinarily painful." In fact, he said, you'll never find in Scripture where we're commanded to ask God to humble us. We're always told to humble ourselves. And I can tell you from personal experience, humbling myself is way less painful and uncomfortable than when God has to make me become humble. You see, this story right here is Jacob. Jacob still has some fight left in him. He's still scheming and plotting. He's coming back. He's trying to figure out, how am I going to come back to the land and not to be crushed by this person that I've left with such enmity towards me, that I wronged and I did things in a way that showed them that I did not care for them. I robbed him. And so Jacob comes with schemes. But I don't want us to lose the context of this. What did God say when he came to Jacob? He said, "Go back to the land and I will cause you to prosper." But Jacob, standing here, becomes afraid again. I mean, how many times have you and I said, if God just told me to do X, then I wouldn't be afraid, or I wouldn't be worried, or I wouldn't be anxious. I'd just go do it. But Jacob here is a prime example of how you and I often have God saying, go and do X, and we become afraid and we become anxious. Even though we know he has called us to do it, is he really going to hold true to his word? So Jacob still has this fight in him. He's freeing from Laban. And as he comes here, notice this: who greets him as he gets there? Verse 1, and God's angels met him. Do you think that God is any less in this journey and where you're going now, Jacob, just because you're standing here and the reality that your brother is over there in that land is settling in on you? Do you think it's dawned on God that he's there? No, God's saying, I'm still here with you. In fact, I'm meeting you at the door to welcome you back into the land I promised you. So, who waits for him further? Esau. So Jacob sends his messengers out to seek his favor, and the reply, Esau's coming to him with 400 men. Now that doesn't sound like I'm coming to you with good intentions, does it? I'm coming to you with 400 armed men ready for war. 400 men is a large encampment of men coming against you, especially in a time where civilizations were much smaller than they are in our period. Like, you don't have armies of millions and millions and millions like we do. So he's coming towards him. And now Jacob has to decide. Who he is, who's truly in his heart, is going to be exposed and come out. Because he's hemmed in on all sides. He has Laban behind him, who he has a destroyed relationship with. He has Esau in front of him, who he has a destroyed relationship with. And now, the only thing he has to cling to is to try to come up with some scheme of protecting himself and earning favor back with Esau, or trusting in God. But that seems crazy. He has 400 men. And if we're honest with ourselves, there's a lot of times that you and I are in situations like this. We go into a circumstance, we know what the right thing is to do, but we feel the anxiety of the circumstances pressing in on us. And the circumstance is visible. It's in front of us. It's right there. It feels way more real than the promises that God is giving us. And we have to decide, what are we actually going to take action steps based on? Are we going to base it on the things that are in front of our eyes, the sounds we hear, the smells that we smell? Are we going to base it on what's in front of us, or are we going to continue to live, if we're honest with ourselves, sometimes in a way that feels delusional, like we're believing in something that's not really there, that is this promise that God has given us? And so, Jacob is afraid and distressed. He comes up with a scheme. He divides the camp. The first group is a test. Is Esau going to attack them or not? Maybe they will butter Esau up because it's just wave after wave after wave of gifts and blessing, so that when I finally get there, maybe then he'll receive me. And then we read in verse 21, so the gift was sent ahead of him, while he remained at camp. And he got up that night and he sends his wives and his children across. And then it's just Jacob standing there. You know, if there was ever a point where, I've heard men say, I would love to just go run off into the wilderness and just leave there with no responsibilities and no things pressing on me. Jacob's probably having those very same thoughts that a lot of us have had. He's standing there. Across that is all of this responsibility, all the consequences for the choices I've made, all the reproach, possible threat to my life, but also the immeasurable blessing that God's telling me to, this blessing that will be a lot of work and responsibility as well. Or there's the desert I could flee to and go off and raise some, go make a homestead and grow my own wheat and make my own yogurt and all that kinds of stuff that people talk about now. And so, as he stands here, in this moment, what happens? The first thing I want us to see this is resisting God leads to being humbled. I told you, don't ask for humility, humble yourself. But what I can also tell you is that if you do stand proud, God will resist you, and he will humble you. It's what James 4:6 says. But God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So, in this moment, what does Jacob do? There's this man that appears. I'll just spoil it for you. Later on, we're told in Hosea that this was an angel from God. These are probably the angels that greeted Jacob when he's coming up. And it says they start wrestling. This spiritual wrestle and turmoil that's been going on in Jacob's life, all of his life, for and against God, is now devolved into a physical confrontation where he is now physically wrestling with the messengers from God. And he's angry, and they're going back and forth, and they're doing this all night long until the sun starts to come up. There's some gumption in Jacob. There's some grit and resolve. And he's pushing and he's wrestling. And he wrestles with them until daybreak. Some of us know people like this. They are stubborn. They will wrestle and wrestle and wrestle. They will fight and have contention. They will never submit and back down. And sometimes that's incredibly admirable. But other times it is so dumb. People who get resolved in their ways and refuse to change and pivot, and the result, they just sink further and further. The husband who keeps opening his mouth as the wife looks and says, "You're digging a hole." We see this play out in our lives with other people and with ourselves, where our pride gets the best of us and gets us to keep pushing forward. And it is especially true when we're afraid and distressed. It is especially true when you and I are anxious, that we start to resort to our most innate desires, like just what naturally comes out of us. We start acting on instinct. And that's what Jacob is doing, and he's wrestling with God, and it's almost daybreak, and you would think maybe Jacob is doing it. Like, this is an example of a man who's standing up to his God, and he's had hard circumstances, and yes, he's made mistakes, but he's stubborn, and he keeps pushing forward, and maybe that's the lesson until this moment happens. When the man saw they could not defeat him, he struck Jacob's hip socket as they wrestled and dislocated his hip. Now, they wrestled all night, and then in a single moment, the messenger just goes, boop, and Jacob is, for the rest of his life, walking with a limp. Like, here's what this reminds me of. This reminds me of when my children come up to me and say, Daddy, let's wrestle. I don't take my child and throw them with my full force. What? Who asked why not? I don't do that. Why? Because I love my children. So I sling them gently onto the couch or whatever it is that I do with them. When they're coming up and they're hitting me, I don't punch them back as hard as I can. I condescend myself. That's what I condescend myself. I lower my strength. I reserve my strength. It's like any Superman or superhero that you watch. They reserve their strength when they're not wanting to do damage. Like, it's what a good father does. You don't actually hurt your children. I'm so glad you just figured this out. But when you're doing this is what God is doing with Jacob. Jacob's whole life, he's been wrestling with God. He's been fighting with him. He's been pushing against him. He's been stubborn. And maybe Jacob's head, in his mind, he thinks, I'm actually doing something because I have strength to resist God. Maybe some of the reason why I've been blessed is because I've resisted. And in this moment, what becomes immediately clear is that even a messenger from God has the ability to incapacitate Jacob. The reason he has persisted, the reason why he has kept moving forward, the reason why he has been allowed to live has been not because his God could not resist him. It's been because his God loves him and has been patient with him. And is, yes, as a father and son often do, they've had this tension and this push and this give and this take, but it was never because he was on equal playing fields with his God. It was because his God was going to make sure that he got to the other end of this trial and became the man he wanted him to become. And you know what Jacob realizes in that moment? Jacob finally gets it and realizes just how dependent he needs to be on his father. You see, they're wrestling. Jacob won't quit. And the man says, let me go. Jacob won't. He dislocates his hip. But it says, and Jacob just held onto his feet, just squeezing on, refusing to let go. And the man says, let me go. And he says, I will not until you bless me. This is a man that has lost everything. He will no longer be able to even walk the same. And he's laying on the ground after a night of exhaustion. And yes, he is a man with grit and resolve. But you know what he finally puts that grit and resolve towards? Clinging to the feet of his Savior, saying, I will not let go until you bless me. This man that's wrestled with God for so long finally gets where he's supposed to put all of his strength and energy. It's not in becoming independent of God. It is in this just resolved, determined dependence on his God. Have you ever seen this in your own life? I know I have. Those moments where there were things in my heart that I did not know were in there. And then God let me go through a season of trial, of difficulty, of suffering. And these things that I would have never told you were in my heart start to come out. Those moments where I'm finally standing there looking at God and I realize I've been walking with a limp this whole time. It might not have been a physical one, but it was a spiritual one. And I come to that point to where I finally, just like Jacob, finally just have to cling to my God's feet and say, I won't let you go until you bless me. I'll tell you what it sounded like for me. I'm not going to stop screaming at you until you finally speak to me, God. A time where I felt like God was just not present. And just day by day, that became my prayer. God, I need you to speak to me. I need to hear from you. You feel so far off and distant, and I can't do this unless you come and meet with me. You know, like the persistent widow. God, I'm not going to stop coming to your court until you bring justice about. Like, that was the lesson that Jacob finally got. I mean, we've seen people that, like Jacob, let's take him if he was someone that we're watching. Many of us, if we saw Jacob, would actually be really frustrated with how it seems that God still blesses Jacob. He's a liar and a thief. He shows favoritism. He's not the most standout man that we see. And sometimes we see people that do things we don't like, that we disagree with, even immoral things. And it still seems like God brings blessing, and it can frustrate us. Have you ever felt that injustice? How could God let that person, how could God continue to give that person? Why is God letting them prosper in this way when they, and I'll just say, pointing to Jacob, maybe the reason why sometimes God puts those people in front of us, it's not because that person's great, but it's because you and I fail to understand truly how magnificent his grace is. And so he lets these living case studies dwell in front of us, showing us that his grace was never built on performance, and that sometimes he gives grace even to the wicked. And it's not there so that we go angry and just bitter and cry out for justice against that person. That sometimes is true. But maybe sometimes God puts those people in front of us so that we will see them and we will say, God, you are so good and kind. And if that's how gracious you are to them, God, would you be gracious to me? What about when the man finally asked him? I mean, this is a cool little note. The man says, what's your name? It's supposed to call to mind when Isaac asked him the same thing. Who are you? If you remember what was happening, he's coming in to steal the birthright, the blessing from his brother. And when he comes in, he stands there and his father says, who are you? And he says, I'm Esau. Well, now Jacob's standing there in front of his God, and his God says to him, who are you? This blessing's finally going to come, but he says, who are you? And Jacob has to say, I am Jacob. Finally saying who he really is before his God. Isn't that much of what confession is with me and you? Confession before our God, what often comes the moment before we receive the blessings from our God, is us finally agreeing and saying out loud to God who we really are, who he's known we are the whole time, that he sees us, and we say, this is who I am. And instead of Jacob having to steal a blessing on the merit of lying about who he is, it is now through confessing his own failures. It is through him owning who he is, everything that the name Jacob represents, that God now gives him a blessing that is greater than he could have ever stolen, and he does it out of grace, out of kindness. It says your name will no longer be Jacob. It will be Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. All this wrestling, all of this striving, he's not condemned for it, but he is finally learning how to put it in its right place. And when God breaks your pride, as he does with Jacob at this moment. He breaks Jacob's confidence in himself to bring about what he needs. Jacob is afraid to go into the land because there is a physical threat that's about to come upon him. And he now can't even hardly walk. He has broken this man. When God breaks your pride, it's not to destroy you. When God breaks your pride, it is to show you how desperately you needed him all along. But you were able to convince yourself otherwise through coping. You see, Jacob didn't receive the blessing because he claimed independence and he finally rushed away from God. He gets the blessing when he finally comes to the point of just demanding dependence. God, this is who you are. These are your promises you've given to me, and now I am afraid and I am claiming if you are God who is faithful and true, you have to keep your word. How bold of a God do we have that is so true to his word? I mean, this should just make us marvel that you and I can go before our God in prayer and say, you have said this, because he wrote it down for us. And we say, you have said this, you have to keep it. It's who you are. And if you fail to keep your word, God, you are not a God worth worshiping. But that our God has given us that to be able to go in front of him. Not that we now somehow have authority over him, but that if he is truly who he's always said he is, if he is always yes and amen, if he is always someone who keeps his word, then we can hold him to his word. But we also know that he always keeps his word. It's not that there was ever any threat that God was not going to take care of Jacob. It was just that Jacob doubted God would. And finally, God took away that last idol of independence, his physical well-being even, and Jacob is left entirely dependent on him. You see, when Jacob was humbled, this is what Hosea says about him. He struggled with the angel and prevailed. He wept and sought his favor. What did the prevailing look like for Jacob? It didn't look like he conquered the angel and got to leave on his own. What did prevailing look like? He finally understood how dependent he was supposed to be on his God. He finally gave up hope in himself. It wasn't that he prevailed in a way of becoming independent. It was actually the independence that he prevailed from. He came to a point of humbling himself. The greatest men that I know are often the most humble men. They're the ones that can say, I don't know. They're the ones that can say, I've never heard this before, I need to look more into it. They're the ones that know how to defer and to delegate. They're the ones that recognize their own limits. They often have a really good sense of, this is how God designed me, and these are the parameters he gave me to work within, and I'm going to work really well in those. But God's designed all these other people around me to help support and to shore up. And I don't have to be everything to all people. I have to be who God created me to be. And trust that God will be all things to all people. The greatest men I know, they're not passive. These aren't men that just because they recognize their limits that they all of a sudden become irrelevant. In fact, it seems like God often puts them in the leadership positions of different organizations and places, whether they want it or not. And they usually become a tremendous blessing to the people around them because they realize they're not the end-all, be-all, that God's the end-all, be-all. There becomes this higher calling and purpose over their life that governs how they do everything. They conduct themselves in a way where they get offended or someone tries to cause offense to them. And they just simply don't take themselves serious enough in order to get super offended at the person. But they also have these spines of steel that they're not pushed over. And they recognize, like how God does, the pride in other people around them, and they will push back and resist the pride of others. They'll give grace to those who walk in humility, and they will resist the proud themselves. Those are a lot of the greatest men I know. They're not there because they are all things and they think they're above everything. They often There's a book, a leadership book I was reading. It said, never trust a leader who doesn't walk with a limp. Someone who hasn't been through something. Someone who doesn't have any injury. Who's never had to go through harm themselves and then come out the other side choosing to trust God. Never trust a leader who doesn't walk with a limp. And we see this in Scripture. Think of Paul praying, God, would you remove these thorns from me, this thorn in the flesh? And yet God says, what? My grace is sufficient. My grace is sufficient. What is grace? Grace makes me and you dependent beggars to our God. We need you to show up. We need you to change this person's heart. We need you to change our hearts. We need you to give us the strength, to give us the love, to produce the fruits of the Spirit in us. We need you to do these things. The second thing is following God leads to progress. Jacob now walks with a limp towards his brother, but here's the thing. We never walk taller than when we humble ourselves. And Jacob may be walking with a limp, but he's walking in a way that he does seem to get a lesson from this. You see, before this, Jacob had put his wives and children in front of him. Who did he protect the most? Himself. I'm at the back of the pack. And as he comes out of this and he crosses the river and he starts to go, what he actually does is he walks to the head of that second camp. He goes and faces his brother now. More dependent, more needy, less strength, and yet he now actually has the resolve to go and to face his brother, where the night before, when he was whole, physically whole, he was actually filled with fear. This is a changed man. And not only that, we see later at the end, he sets up an altar and he says, this is the altar to the God of Israel. Up until this point in the story, he always referred to God as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac. And then he would say, and I'm your servant. But he finally gets it, and he finally says, you are my God. This is my God. So we see that. A man who's growing. But you know what we also see? A man who still has parts of his shadow side with him. You want to see the example? When he lines up his family, he still puts his favorite wife and son in the back. There's this favoritism that started with his mother and father choosing him or Esau, is now continuing in him as he chooses his favorite wives and children. And he orders them in a way that puts the least favorite at the front and the most at risk. And he orders them in a way that this favoritism is going to continue throughout his story and eventually destroy his family. Do you realize this favoritism? You want to know who the son is that he puts at the very back? It's the one he later gives the coat of many colors to. The favoritism that he has is going to rob the security from his family and destroy it. This is a man who is both truly walking with God in a way he never has and making progress, and also is still committing some of the same mistakes that he's always made. That's why here, and it's not just here, but you'll hear this, it's about progress, not perfection. It could be very easy for churches to come together and to say what it means for us is that we're all going to stand in this room and put on our best looks and pretend we're the best version of ourselves and never let anyone see our shadow side. We're going to keep it tucked away, always behind us, always out of sight. And that would be great, except what then happens is you go home and that thing is still there. And you don't feel any more prepared to fight it. And you're alone in that fight. So we say it's about progress, not perfection. Why? Because I expect, and it has proven to be the case, that when a church is willing to help people walk through the darkest parts of their lives, there's going to be a lot that we learn about each other and we find out about each other in the ways that we don't truly follow God. the things we still doubt and struggle with, the imperfections, the sins that have had a hold on our life our entire lives, sometimes that have been in our families for generations. And there's going to be these things that we have that we're having to deal with and having to fight. And if we think that showing up on Sunday means you have to be perfect, that you have to show up and you can't show those things, well, then you're going to show up here on Sunday and you're going to put on your Sunday best, and you're never going to have people rally around you to help you fight these things, to grow in these things. Why? Because everybody just wants to show up and look pretty and look perfect. But that's not what Christ has called us to. He told us to bear one another's burdens. But it's also not about showing up and taking grace on in such an excessive way that we just think, oh God, your grace is so marvelous that I'm never going to try to do any better. I'm just going to depend on your grace. It's also about striving, not settling. We strive and we progress and we fight against the idols of perfection or of settling. We work together to help one another grow, to encourage, to build up, to teach one another. We come alongside each other to carry one another's burdens because we are striving towards this progress. And that's what we see in Jacob's life. He made progress. I also think it's worth noting this great failure of him preserving that came on the heels of one of the greatest successes of his life. There are times that you are going to have such an incredible high moment. You go on a trip. You have some kind of encounter with God. There's some way that you just experience this fresh renewal of your relationship with him. Or you have success in your job, or things are going great in your family. A lot of times, it is when you have the greatest success that is happening that on the heels of that, you have the greatest temptations, the greatest doubts, and the greatest fears start coming out. It doesn't exclude it. They both rise together, seemingly. So, be on guard of that. I know that if there is a Sunday that I show up here and it is just absolutely overwhelming, high moment encouragement, I know that there's usually something coming on the heels of it. Just start preparing for it. And so I think it's appropriate in our lives. Why? Why do we have that tendency? I think sometimes when God gives us an abundant blessing and gift, it's a moment where we get the gift and we start thinking subtly in our mind again, maybe he gave this to me because I got it right. I finally got it right. And that's why he's giving me this big blessing right now. And we can let our pride immediately start to grab hold and start to root again. Where we start to think that this whole thing is about, well, yeah, I know it's about grace, but there's a lot of people that need a lot more grace than I do. And God's really working with me because I'm something special, truly. And we all laugh and shake our heads, and we're like, yeah, absolutely not. And then we just give us a week, and we'll all feel that pride swell up in some way or another that we know it's there. The third thing, belonging to God leads to blessing. Contrary to his schemes, you know what was incredible? God was preparing the heart of Esau to receive Jacob before Jacob even returned. Jacob, it says in verse 3, he went ahead of him and bowed down to the ground 7 times until he approached his brother. He is just wallowing in the dirt, literally. So how's Esau going to greet him? Esau runs up and meets him and hugs him and throws his arm around him and kisses him, and then they weep. Jacob insists that Esau take this large portion of his gifts and his possessions and urges him to, please take my present that was brought to you, because God has been gracious to me and I have everything I need. So Jacob urged him until he accepted. You know, the word there, please take my present, that word is actually blessing. It's the same word for what Jacob stole from Esau at the beginning of this whole saga. So Jacob coming back, he actually does make restitution. He realizes he wronged his brother. He realizes he stole something from his brother. And as he comes back and he starts to mend, he doesn't just show up and say, Jacob or Esau, I'm sorry. Now treat me as if I never did anything wrong. Like, we're just going to move ahead. We're going to be good old pals, brothers. But I still got all of this stuff, all this blessing over here. I'm still going to keep it all for myself. We see this example in Zacchaeus. When Zacchaeus comes to Jesus, what does he do? He goes back and he gives to the people that he stole from, and he pays them interest on top of it. You know, I think it shows to us, to a world, when you and I have done wrong to someone, and we tell them about how much God has gotten a hold of our hearts and how we just had an encounter with him, and he showed us how we are so sorry, and we're so sorry for the harm we did to that person and the wrong we did to them. And we say, hey, would you forgive me? And they say, yes. And we did something that cost them in some way. It cost them, we'll use Zacchaeus, financially. He took from them. I think of the Hendrick brothers' Flywheel, if any of you have ever seen that movie. A car salesman that rips off people, comes to know the Lord, becomes incredibly convicted. Like, it's based off of the story of Zacchaeus, just put it in modern days. What does he do? He doesn't say, well, God, I know I became wealthy by ripping off all these people, but you've saved me now, and I'm going to take all that money that I earned improperly, and I'm just going to go and enjoy this new freedom that you've had. He does what Zacchaeus does. He goes back. He actually makes amends, real amends, amends that hurt to make. That is the truth of what we call the gospel when we ourselves are receiving this, where Christ has made amends between us and God on our behalf. It didn't come free. It was just something so immeasurable that you and I couldn't pay it. That when now we are going back to someone that we have wronged, it is appropriate for us to try to make amends to what has happened to them. You know what was incredible, though? Esau didn't even expect it. What does he do when Jacob's gifts come to him? He's like, after he's already embraced him, after he has already forgiven him, after he's already accepted him, he then is like, and what was with all those things you sent my way? Like, he doesn't even need it. Why? Because God was working in Esau's heart to prepare him to receive Jacob in this moment before Jacob even knew that Esau was coming to him. The provision and the security that Jacob was going to need to go back into the land, do you think that just slipped God's mind? He forgot about Esau? No, he remembered. And he went ahead of Jacob to work and to pave the ground for him. My friends, there are so many times that you and I are fighting. There's a song, I'm fighting a battle that you've already won. So many times that you and I are striving and anxious and filled with turmoil, trying to figure out how to accomplish something. And the reality is our God has already won the battle for us to do it. It's a matter of you and me walking in demanding dependence on our God, saying, we will not let you go, and we will not go ahead unless you go with us. But if you are with me, I know you are for me, and we are going to go to this. You know, I'll give you another example. The band, you can go ahead and come up. Another example of whether or not we truly understand the grace that we've received ourselves is this. With those that you have some sort of break in your relationship with those that you have some sort of low view of, with those that have harmed you in some way, here's my question. Take Esau, for example. Would you be content if that person showed back up in your life, and rather than God wiping them out and giving them what they deserve, God gave them grace? The person that you are showing up and you are having issues with, all of a sudden, there's no need for confrontation. There's no need for reproach. There's no need for those things because God has humbled them and brought them to the point of actually walking with him. Would you be willing to accept that? Or would it gripe you? Would you think, no, they deserve something? There's some kind of way that they need to bear the consequences. They need some way of punishment, some recourse that they have to go through. Is that your response to someone in that circumstance? Because if that is, here's my point. You don't understand the gospel of grace where God reconciled you to himself and never demanded payment from you. That it is true that we bear harm in this, but this whole story of Jacob, it has been a story of God's overwhelming grace. And the reason why we just keep hammering this, why the book of Genesis keeps hammering grace, is because we are so prone to pride. Pride in ourselves, pride in those that are of our own group. And we fail to realize how much we need to live by grace on a day-to-day basis and how much others need it as well. You see, some of you may be wrestling with God. Some of you have been wrestling with God for a long time. There are areas that he's speaking into your life, things that he's confronting, but your pride swells up, you don't want to accept it, and you push against him. And here's what I'm telling you. The reason why God is wrestling with you, it's not because you have the ability and you're on the same playing field and you can overcome him. The reason God's wrestling with you is what Romans 2:4 says. Or do you despise the riches of his kindness, his restraint? It's not the Father just chucking you against the wall. Do you despise that he shows restraint and patience with you, not recognizing that his kindness is intended to lead you to forgiveness? That's why God shows restraint with you. That's why he keeps, in your eyes, wrestling with you. You're not his equal. You are loved by him. And in his kindness, he resists you so that you will be set free. Free from this idol of independence and realize you need him. That's where he gives you a new name. That's where he rewrites your future. That's where the blessing starts to shower down. So if you would, stand with me. We're going to take a moment to pray. This is a moment for you to pray, for you to respond how God's leading you. And if you would like to talk with me, I will be down here at the front. But if you've been wrestling with God, maybe today is finally the day he's getting through your heart, and you realize that the call is for you to humble yourself before him, to stop living on your own 2 feet and to fall in front of his and cling to them and say, I will not let you go until you bless me. There's a couple of prayers that can help guide your time. Father, help us to see your kindness and to turn quickly to repentance. Jesus, thank you for your example of radical dependence on the Father and the legacy your life had. Spirit, give us strength to humble ourselves and depend on our God.